G'day everyone, my name's Chris. I'm the minister here at Lismore Anglican Church, and today I want to share with you about a ministry that is close to my heart, a ministry that is impacting thousands of children in Cambodia, a ministry that I believe God is using in incredible ways. This ministry is the ministry of Pastor Abraham Hung and the development for the people of Cambodia in Cambodia. He serves in two places, in a slum, Andong village, in the capital city, Phnom Penh, and then about an 8-hour drive north in a province called Oda Menche. He runs another school and a series of churches, and he is providing hope to thousands of families across these two schools and communities. Abraham is a man whom God is using powerfully, not only spiritually but physically as well, providing relief from poverty and an education for young people so that they can take themselves out of the poverty in which they find themselves. It is such an amazing and powerful ministry. I've been blessed to have been to Cambodia twice. I've been able to hang out with Abraham on a couple of his trips to Australia as well. My heart beats powerfully for this ministry, and I hope too that as you watch this video, you too will see something of what it means to be invested in a partnership where you can see God working so powerfully. And as we hear from Abraham today, as we hear from Rob, who manages the partnership, and as we hear from a couple of Tasmanians, Keith and Andy, and their story from their most recent visit, I hope you'll be encouraged and excited, that you'll at least add Abraham and his team to your prayer list, but maybe even more, you'd consider whether or not this is something God is moving in your heart to give generously towards. Well, first up, Rob Ellson, from a small little island that you might have heard of this summer in Kangaroo Island, Adelaide, South Australia. And he's going to share with us his heart, his passion, as well as what's going on in the ministry that Abraham is doing in Cambodia at the moment.
Rob, can you tell us, sort of give us a snapshot of what's been going on in the ministry for the last 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, been a lot happening, as there always is over a 12-month period. Some really exciting things. A couple of years ago, we bought a block of land over the road from the current Andong school with a view to building a new school. We knew the tenure on the existing school was going to come to an end at some point in time, given that we didn't own the land. So we were able to purchase this block. It was hideously expensive, 100 grand US, which at the time was 150 grand Australian. So we managed to find the money for that, which was awesome. And then the actual building project has been in the forefront of our mind for a long time, and we've finally been able to commit to that about 6 months ago. So we come up with a design, did some costings on it, put it out to tender, and secured what has turned out to be a really committed builder. He's been fantastic. Done a really good job to this point in time. So the budget was 175,000 US, which with the horrible exchange rate we've got at the moment, worked out at a bit over 300 grand Australian, with some extra little things along the way that always happen when you embark on a building project. So yeah, we're nearing the end of that now, which is really good. We've only got probably about a month and a half to go, and the school will be all finished, which will be terrific. Mm-hmm. So looking ahead to moving the kids into the new school at the start of the new school year, which this year is going to be a little bit later than normal thanks to COVID-19. So we'll probably have the kids starting in the new school first week in November. So it's a very exciting time for them, for the village. It's it's not just a school for them, as you know. It's a real beacon of hope for a change in their prospects in the future. So the project did grind to a halt. The building project did grind to a halt back in March when construction stopped in Cambodia, like a lot of other places, and the Aussie dollar took a real plummet as well, got down to about 55 cents. So we just couldn't justify sending. It just made the project cost unattainable at that time. So we did have to put the brakes on, which was a bit disheartening for the families that were enjoying hearing all the banging and crashing over the fence with the new school. But it all started up again last week. So yeah, they're all quite excited to see things finished, and the kids will be in there soon. And yeah, it's a very impressive building. It'll hold them in good stead for a long time. So that's probably been the real highlight in the last sort of 6 to 12 months. But been lots of other real great stuff going on as well. Done some small building projects for a few families in Andong, some emergency building projects for families that are really doing it tougher than most. Kids are all doing excellent at school. A lot of our kids now are going on to high school and university, and when you consider where they've come from and the level of education in their homes, which for a lot of them is none, these kids are doing amazing. We had one young fella called Pon Lu that you might have heard a bit about, who comes from a very impoverished background up in OM, who just took to his studies really well. He had to walk 2 hours each way to our primary school in Odamentche, barefooted, but just was really committed to his studies in primary school, did really well at high school, and in the final exams, and he was up against kids in private schools in the cities. He ended up having the second highest score of any kid anywhere in the country, and earned himself a scholarship to go to university. He's now studying engineering and architecture. Got a personal invitation from the Prime Minister to meet him. This is a kid that just came from a little hut, a little dirt floor hut out in the middle of OM.
Which is the middle of nowhere. Yeah.
Absolute middle of nowhere. Yeah, up until a few years ago, there were still landmines there. It's just a remarkable story. This kid's gone from that to going to university and outscoring every kid in the country pretty much. So that was a real highlight in the last 12 months. So he did his final exams in September last year, and it was just such an encouragement for the villagers in his area as well. Like to see someone go through and have such success has really spurred on everyone there. And although they have very little money, they managed to pass the hat around and raise enough money to buy him a little motorbike so he could ride to university each day as well. So they're really proud of what he's done, and it just shows that there is a pathway out of the poverty that you're stuck in. So there's been some amazing things happen. The little churches are growing really well, particularly in Odamentche. Little house churches are springing up everywhere. There's baptisms all the time, and a lot of that is generated through the kids that go to school. Abe is showing the love of Christ to these kids, and the families are a lot more open to the gospel because of it. There's been some really good stuff happen in the last 12 months, as there has been over the last 8, 9, 10 years.
Mm. And so how many kids in the two schools now are we?
We've got over 1,100 in the two schools. Yeah, near enough to 550 at each one. So we are kind of bursting out the seams, and there is more demand from families that want to send their kids there, but we just don't have the room at the moment. Andong School, with this new school building, we will have slightly more capacity than what we've currently got, so we can probably take on another maybe 40 or 50 kids, which would be good. It's a big number. It's a huge number of kids. And we also have what we call the OM House of Hope, which is used to be a brothel, as you probably know all about that one, but we've got 60 high school kids living in that house as well, that otherwise just wouldn't have access to high school. The high school in Odamentche is a long way from where most of the villagers live, and a long way from where our primary school is. So these kids are living full time in this house, getting great mentoring opportunities, learning all the stuff that you'd normally learn at home, cooking and just the normal stuff your parents would teach you. For a lot of these kids, their parents are working over the border in Thailand, obviously not at the moment with COVID-19, but normally they'd be over the border working, and they might see their kids once or twice a year. So it's really important for them to have this fantastic base that they can call home. And they're a real great bunch of kids that they really support each other. There's a family that lives there that sort of basically mentor these kids, and they're doing really well, and it's just a real great sort of foundation for these high school kids. And they're doing exceptionally well at school. Like they're all top of their class, which is amazing when you consider where they've come from.
And so our schools terminate at like grade 6.
Yeah, exactly. grade 6 is where it finishes. So we have explored the option of starting a high school. I mean, it's just a whole different raft of complications to even consider doing that, apart from the fact we don't have room. But what we do is provide really good mentoring to the high school kids, which is evident in how well they're doing when they pop out the other end. So yeah, they are getting as much support as we can offer. And look, not all our kids do go on to high school. Some kids have the primary school education and that's all they'll ever do. They'll go back to the family and just try and support their family, but at least they've got that baseline level of education now where they can understand documents when their families have things that, you know, crop up. And, you know, we saw what happened in Andong with the families there that just couldn't read, and that's how they ended up in the mess they were in initially, was just not understanding what their rights were. So, you know, a year 6 kid has enough ability to at least explain things to their parents. And yeah, so if that's all they ever do, it's still a great skill that they've acquired.
It's like, how have you gotten involved in this, and why do you stay involved?
So the how is it's actually a really nice story. So I went to Cambodia in 2009. There was a group of us here from Kangaroo Island that decided we wanted to do an international volunteer program somewhere in the world. Cambodia, you know, wasn't on the radar specifically for us. In fact, it's quite ironic. We narrowed it down to 3 countries. We applied to Habitat for Humanity, and they gave us 3 countries. There was one in Africa, I think. I reckon the other one was the Philippines or somewhere, and then one was Cambodia. And there was 15 of us that had to try and decide which one of these places we went to. So we ended up just having you just rank the countries from, you know, best to worst. And ironically, I put Cambodia last. I just didn't know anything about the place and didn't really want to go there. Anyway, I lost. Obviously, there was enough people that wanted to go to Cambodia, so we ended up going there. And so the program was, we built a couple of houses for some families that were in a very different demographic to the families we're helping now. They needed to have owned the land. They had to have a minimum income of $250 a month, I think. So they were not the sort of type of families that we're helping at the moment. They're a lot further up the food chain. Anyway, the middle weekend that we visited, we had some extra money. We wanted to chip into something else, and we had it in our minds that we'd go to an orphanage, and that was sort of, you know, the thing a lot of people did in Cambodia back then. We didn't realise at the time that most of the orphanages were very corrupt, and most of the kids weren't actually orphans. They were just country kids that were sent to the city because their families thought there was a better opportunity for them, but most of them lived in very poor conditions and were just masqueraded in front of Westerners to fleece them of a bit of money, and then they were, you know, out the back in the horrible conditions again, and the person running the show was, you know, profiteering and making most of the money. So anyway, our driver who was taking us to our build site every day knew a bit about what Abraham was doing out in Andong village, and he had the courage to speak up and encourage us not to go to an orphanage and consider going out and having a look at what Abe was doing. So we learnt very early on in Cambodia that you don't just hand over wads of cash. You actually, you know, you try and provide something tangible that's going to benefit someone. And so we asked this guy, well, what can we do to support other than just hand over money? And he said, well, I know this guy's started a school, and he, you know, feeds the kids breakfast or lunch, and I don't know much about where he's at with all of that, but you might like to consider, you know, buying some rice or a few things for the school. So we hired a little truck and bought a pallet of rice and a few books and some soy sauce and a few other bits and pieces, and sort of almost turned up out there unannounced. And the look on Abraham's face was just priceless. And, you know, Abe doesn't speak, or certainly didn't speak the best English back then, and he's not a whole lot better now, but he was very grateful for, you know, what we'd done, and we had a look around the village, and then the next day we went back to this Habitat build program, and none of us really thought much more about it. That was a lovely experience, and, you know, a bit of a warm fuzzy feeling, and we kind of felt like we'd done a bit of good. Someone kept a business card of Abe's and just flicked him an email when we got home a couple of weeks later and said, oh, how are you going? And anyway, it turned out that Abe had run out of rice 2 days before we got there. He'd also run out of money in his bank account. Him and Soppin had spent every last dollar they had. And they knew for about 4 or 5 weeks that they were coming to this point where they were going to run out of rice, run out of money. And they've been praying earnestly for, some intervention, someone to come along and help them. And we didn't know any of that. And so, when we heard about that and that we were used for this, unbelievable answer to prayer, was just a very humbling experience. And so we thought, well, okay, maybe we better stay involved after all. We hadn't even thought about Abraham at all since we'd been home, but hearing that story really just touched our hearts. And so that was sort of how we got roped in back in 2009. And initially our support was quite minimal. I think we were just helping out with a couple of teachers. I think our annual contribution was, something in the order of maybe $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, something like that, which is still a reasonable amount of money, but it was fairly modest. Whereas this year we're going to send $380,000 to Cambodia. It's just, if someone had sat me down on that first day in dusty old Andong and said, this is what's going to happen over the next 10 years, I would have just laughed in their face. It just didn't seem possible. And even now, what's happened this year, 2 years ago, just didn't seem possible either. So God has been an amazing provider in all of this, and I'm very gracious, and it's been an incredible ride. In terms of why I do it, look, I see kids as being a bit like books. And in Australia, when you're born in Australia, your books come with blank pages, and those pages are filled in, initially by your parents, by your school teachers, by other people that get alongside you, and then later on in life you fill in the pages yourself when you work out your career and you start a family and all those things. Whereas in Cambodia, a lot of the kids, when they're born, the pages are pretty much filled out already. So for Andong and OM kids, if there wasn't a school, the pages would be just terrible oppression and exploitation, and just they don't have much opportunity to fill in those pages. Whereas now they have these schools and they're getting an education, and those filled in pages are being torn out and being replaced with blank ones that these kids can now fill in. So to be a part of that is very rewarding, and that's pretty much why I do it, is just to give those opportunities to those kids that they deserve it just like any other kid does here. So that's the driving passion for me.
Yeah. And obviously you've been, like, a lot of that money that you're sending this year is for the building of this school and getting all that sorted out. But like, there's a lot of ongoing day-to-day running costs, because it's all free education and food for these kids who may not be able to eat well at home. So I guess, like, what does it cost Abraham to run these schools? Like, especially, like, aside from when he's trying to build one, which you've already said costs, what, 550,000 Australian dollars or something, I think.
320 for the school.
Yeah, plus the land.
Yeah, plus the land, 150 for the land as well. Yeah, yep. Look, we never ever, meet. We have a budget every year that we set out that we, try and achieve if we can, and we never quite sort of get there. There's a lot of gaps in what we're doing, but what we are doing is costing, well, in Australian dollars, it's around about 150 grand a year to run these two schools. It's not just the two schools, we also support the running of the OM house as well, which is not cheap to keep that going for all those kids there. So the total project is about 150 grand Australian a year. The Australian dollar hasn't helped us. When we first started in this project, or being involved in Abe's projects, the Aussie dollar was up around $1.10 US, whereas now it's almost costing us double what it was back then to achieve the same thing. So and when you think about 1,100 kids in the schools and then 70 kids in the OM house, I hope it is run on a shoestring budget really for that number of kids being supported. And there's other stuff going on as well. We run a little truck between the OM village and the high school for the kids who don't live in the OM house as well, and there's other transport needs and there's health needs, and we do have a little bit of direct family support for some families that are really struggling, and so it's a very comprehensive project, quite complex. Yeah.
I think a friend of mine calls it holistic. It's looking after the whole person, not physically, spiritually. And that's a term that Abe uses very regularly. Yeah, it is very much a holistic approach, and it's because of that holistic approach that people are open to the gospel. A lot of them, most of them over there, consider Christianity to be a Western religion that is not for them, not relevant to them, or is not something that that they should even be considering. So it's this holistic approach that that Abe has really adapted so well, that makes them open to the gospel. I know one of the things that struck me when I was in Oda Menche last, or perhaps the first time, was the way that not only has he got this school there, but he's actually helped the families make sure they've got the proper ownership papers. And I think the story I've heard, and you might have to correct me if I'm wrong, is that somehow Abraham managed to kind of convince the government to sort of hand over proper ownership of the farms to these impoverished villages. Is that, have I got the tail end of this?
Yeah, no, you're pretty much right. So Abe has a very good relationship with the local governor up there. Actually, he's just retired, so the guy that's replaced him, unfortunately, is not quite made of the same stuff, and he's been appointed directly by the Prime Minister, so we're probably not going to have that same relationship that we've had in the past. But the previous governor was in fact, he invited Abe up there. That was the only reason Abe went there in the first place, was this governor heard how Abe had advocated for the Andong families, and he wanted someone to come up and help out his local family. So he's a bit of a rarity in Cambodia, because a lot of people are just trying to look after themselves, which is understandable. Whereas this guy does have a big heart for his community. So you're pretty much spot on there. He, between him and Abe, they very much advocated for the proper paperwork, so that there couldn't be any exploitation on those families, which is exactly the same thing that Abe did down in Andong as well. So they do have that security now, which is good. I think the next big challenge up there is to, a bit like a lot of people that own land, they own the land, but they don't really have enough money to start anything to generate income from the land. So, as I said before, most of them work over the border in Thailand. So, one of the things that, in my big picture, sort of looking at where we go one day, is to try and get something happening so those families are actually living together. Having kids, seeing their parents twice a year is just not good enough, really. So if we can, try and come up with some model where they can actually make some reasonable income off of their properties, I think that'll be a fantastic outcome somewhere down the track. Just a little anecdotal story for you about how do we measure how successful this project is, and there's lots of ways of doing it, I guess. We can look at the level of giving that people are making, and that's just unbelievable. Still blows me away that people want to be involved in this stuff. We can look at how many kids are going through the schools, but the kids that are coming out the other end, we don't always get to hear about what they do. Ponlu's a great example of, we're going to follow him very closely. He's my sort of pin-up boy at the moment. I want to see where he goes, and we talk about him a lot. But a lot of the kids just sort of disappear out the gates, and we don't always get a chance to hear about what they're doing. And I was telling me a story recently. He went into one of the government ministry buildings to do the necessary paperwork that he has to do every 6 months, and he was waiting in line there, and this young fella in his sort of late teens, early 20s, wearing a suit, come up and said, "Oh, Pastor Abraham, how you going?" And Abe just drew a complete blank, had no idea who this guy was. He said, going pretty good, thanks. I'm sorry, I don't know who you are. And he said, I went to Andong school. I went to your school. I was one of the first students to go through your school. And he said, I just want to thank you so much that because of that education, I was able to go to high school, and I did really well at high school. And now I've got an excellent job in the government, and I'm earning, a really good wage. And none of that would have happened if you hadn't had your school. And it was a great moment for Abe, because he never enjoys going to these government ministry buildings and filling out this paperwork, because he feels like you get no support from them, but they make you jump through so many hoops. So it was just a great experience for him to actually have this kid come up and say, this is what's happened in my life thanks to you. And there'd be hundreds of other kids out there. When we were there on our last trip, we bumped into a guy that ended up becoming a policeman, which would never happen for an Andong kid otherwise. And another one started a little business that was doing really well. And so there's just these little, stories everywhere if you go digging, which is, fantastic.
Yeah. I was saying to someone the other day, I have this very vivid picture I talk about all the time of the first time I ever walked through Andong slum, and of this kid in his house reading the textbook from school, and I just find it such a vivid picture of everything that Abe's doing with these kids in poverty. Like, I'm thinking, man, if I lived here, I'd be like trying to work out how to survive till tonight and then start again tomorrow. Like, and you're sitting here reading a book, like, because where your education can get you.
Yeah, they place such a high value on it. They really do. It's it's very humbling actually to go to the schools and see how committed the kids are from year one upwards. They're just really committed, and the teachers, they are just so passionate about these kids. They're not earning, we're not paying them huge amounts of money. They're just really passionate about these kids. So yeah, and Abe's such a great leader. He just brings out the best in people. It is remarkable. And we need to give credit to Sophan as well. She's really supportive and very heavily invested in what they do. They're just an awesome team.
We've talked a little about the relationship Abe had with the governor in OM, recently retired governor. I know though as well, you've sort of hinted at it in his paperwork, but sometimes his relationship with the government is sort of life-threatening, I think, over the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. The governor in Andong village is now in jail. Actually put a hit out on Abe a few years ago. So the land right laws in Cambodia, as a result of the Khmer Rouge days, basically, and it still stands today, is if you occupy a parcel of land for more than 5 years and no one can come up with any evidence that they actually own that piece of land, you're legally entitled to that parcel of land, and you can get a document that says you are. So when these families were evicted out to Andong village in 2006, and no one wanted to be there because it was just a dirty old swamp back then. But Phnom Penh's finally caught up with Andong village, and there's a lot of development around, and it's actually quite sought after land now. It's a bit of an emerging area. Well, in 2011, they were going to reach that 5-year milestone where they were then legally entitled to keep that land forever. Well, there was a lot of pressure to displace these people again, like kick them off. This land now had substantial value. So I advocated for these people to get this little bit of paper that meant that they could never be kicked off their land again. Well, the local governor wasn't too happy about that. He wanted to get the land back because it had substantial value. So he put a hit out on Abe and his family, and he actually approached one of the kids in Andong village and offered him $10,000, which you can imagine to a slum village kid, that's like me offering you probably $3 million to kill Abe and his entire family. And this guy went to authorities and told them what had happened or what he'd been offered. And the guy, and he wasn't just wanting to kill Abe, there were other people he had a hit on as well. Ended up in prison as a result of it. So, and that's not the first time that Abe's life has been threatened. There's been other times as well where and it's all as a result of him advocating for their human rights. So yeah, there's a lot at stake for him. There really is.
Absolutely. And I think it shows his commitment to the people whom God has called him to serve.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's
been a lot of temptation for him as well. There's been people who have approached him personally, not wanting to kill him, but trying to entice him to turn against these people as well, with very large sums of money. And in fact, when he used to work for the government, unfortunately, a lot of government workers are very corrupt. I had a reasonably good position in the Ministry of Education, and you had this identity card, which apparently gives you leverage to do lots of things with it that you probably shouldn't be, but you can make a lot of money out of these identity cards. But when he turned his back on the government and walked away from it, I think he was offered close to 200 grand for this identity card, for someone to assume his identity as a government worker, which would have done enormous good things for his ministry, which he didn't accept that money. But there's been a lot of temptation along the way.
Yeah, I think integrity certainly is a word that I would use if I was describing Abraham. Absolutely.
Yep. And there's been potential partners, in recent years that I've had a bit to do with that he hasn't been willing to partner with because of, aspects of what they do that he thinks goes against what he's trying to, ingrain in his the people that he's helping. He finds that very hypocritical if we just take their money, but he really isn't happy with the way they conduct themselves. So you're right. Integrity is everything for Abe, which is remarkable in a place like Cambodia.
Yeah, absolutely. Very remarkable. I guess to finish, obviously, we've talked a little bit about finance. I thought it might be worth talking a little bit about the Global Development Group.
Yes,
because they sort of help out with the financial side of things in terms of management of that, and then why you think it's worth getting involved in this ministry, even if it's just on the basic level of taking an interest and praying if you're a person of prayer, or giving if that's something you feel inclined to do.
Yeah, so Global Development Group it's been a very fruitful partnership. So we here looked at trying to get ourselves to the point where we could get some tax deductibility for our contributions. To do that as a small little organisation was you just would drown in the paperwork. So we ended up being directed towards Global Development Group, and it's been a wonderful partnership on so many different levels. We do have tax deductibility for our donations now, so it makes people's giving, they get a bit back depending on their circumstances. I guess the other thing that's been really important is there's just a lot more transparency and accountability now. Not that we question Abe, and we certainly don't have any issues locally, but it's just good to have a backing of a big organisation that's audited by the government, and there's very stringent reporting that Abe is required to do now, which he's been doing for a long time anyway, but to have that filter back through an organisation like GDG is fantastic. And it's also opened up opportunities for him to network with other like-minded people in Cambodia, which has been a good support for him. And there's been opportunities for training for his staff. Some of his leadership staff have done some really good training courses as well. So yeah, initially, selfishly, all I really wanted to do was join so we could get some tax deductibility, but it's bared a lot more fruit than that. So it's been well worth doing. What was your other question, Chris?
I guess for people at home who might be considering their own involvement.
Yeah. So if you are thinking about being involved in this, look, I would encourage you to prayerfully consider it. It's an amazing program what Abe is able to achieve over there with very little. The benefits, or the people that benefit from this, it's an incredible thing that we can run 2 schools with 1,100 kids, a high school house of hope for these kids that otherwise are a long time away from their families. and just the growth of the church there. Like, we're a little church here on Kangaroo Island that, you know, we're going through a fair bit at the moment, but we get a great deal of encouragement out of the growth that Abe's having in his church there. It's just quite remarkable how hungry these people are, and it happens through the kids. You know, it's the holistic approach that Abe has to his ministry. The help for the kids and the family see that, and they just don't understand why someone would want to do that, and they also don't understand why people like us would come over there and want to build houses for them, or, you know, get horribly dirty and muddy in the slums. And it's not the way Cambodians do things. They look after their own family, but that's about as wide as the sphere gets. So look, it's a wonderful program. Abe is just one of the most amazing people I've ever met. He's so committed. There's been times where we've tried to help him out specifically, or his family, and I know the money has just gone back into the project. He just gives so much of himself and so much of the finances. So yeah, you won't find anyone that's more committed to a community than what Abe and Sopan are to the villages in Andong and OM. Yeah, it's been an amazing journey thus far, and I can't wait to see where we go in the next 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. It's exciting, isn't it?
Certainly is, yeah.
So exciting that I even changed jobs and still can't get it out of my heart.
Yeah, and look, we appreciate your support too, Chris. Your church down there. You know, you contributed some money recently, which without that we wouldn't have got across the line with the school either. So yeah, thank you for being involved in that and staying involved and advocating for Abe. And hopefully we can get over there again and see him soon, and get him back here again as well. Who knows when that'll happen, but yeah, as soon as it can, it will be happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to my next trip. It's been too long. I don't know how long it's been.
To try and go together one time. That'll be good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks so much, Rob. I'm sure you at home found that just as informative and helpful and inspiring as I did. We're going to hear now from Abraham himself about what he's up to and the challenges he's facing, as well as what God has been doing through his ministry. How are things in Cambodia?
Yeah, Cambodia still situation COVID-19 not yet to people can go to meet a lot of amount people. Still small people can meet. Example, like we go to put in a church only like maybe 10 people, so we can use a lot of group to worship, because we can't use online.
Yes.
And so have a busy with teach children their home, small group every day.
Yeah. So are your schools closed?
The school not open for school building, but we could pick them their home like 10 children or 8 children, to a small group. Because we need to finish a program in the school. We open again in November. We can start new year. We need all the children pass the class.
Okay. Yeah. How are the churches going? Lots of people becoming Christians lately, or has there been lots of?
I think we have some. But now we have some new believer in OM.
Yeah.
So now I'm busy with follow up a new believer. I like some of them husband or teacher in OM school. But the teacher in OM school, they pray, and maybe 6 or 7 years, we need the husband of them to believe in Christ. So just like last month, they desire to believe in Christ. So teacher, they so happy, and they testimony and big cry because their husband now believe in Christ. So I need to follow up them.
Yes.
every week. Now I think
Yeah.
every week we need to follow up.
Yeah, oh, that's good. What a great answer to prayer. What would you like to say to people here in Australia who support you?
Yeah, yeah. I would like to say thank you so much. We see now ministry Cambodia. We call like transforming Cambodian people for Christ. With that, now we see a lot of happen. I want to like share. Now we see some children in Ando and OM now. Some they finish, they become a teacher, and some they finish graduate. Some they go to high school and university, but some they become a policeman, and we see the fruit of the, but especially their hearts dear to love Jesus and follow Jesus. I'm so happy to see their life, and I would like to say thank you so much because of you in support us now to see a big change for Cambodia, for Cambodia transform people to for Christ. So I would like to say thank you so much because it's like we call like a body of Christ. You and me, we are body of Christ. We work together for Cambodia. So thank you so much, all of you. Yeah, because your support now happen and see a lot of happen for Cambodia for the gospel for change Cambodia to Christ, yeah, for Christ. Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for Chris. You always you are thinking about me and Mystery Cambodia. But one day I would like to request you to come train our leader Cambodia. Now we need to a leader to respond a lot of work for Cambodia. So we start mainly place. So now we need a leader. So very important. I need you. I really need you come to help me to train our leader Cambodia. Really need you.
I look forward to coming. I can't wait to
Thank
come
you.
back.
God bless you all. God
Yeah.
bless you all. Yeah.
Thank you, Abraham. Wow, isn't that great? Just hearing from Abraham and his powerful story. Next up, I invited a couple of my mates, Andy and Keith, around to do an interview to talk about their most recent trip to Cambodia and how that had impacted them. So guys, tell me about your most recent trip to Cambodia.
It was fantastic.
It was?
We went in December of last year, just for 12 days, and it was just Keith and myself.
Yep.
And yeah, we went to Andong and we went to Odamenche, the place where Abraham has his two schools. And yeah, we got to just be a part of what he was doing for those 2 weeks. We got involved with his Christmas services. We played a lot of soccer.
Talking cricket.
Yeah,
yeah, it was
bit
good.
of cricket. Ran Bible studies, did music. Yeah, we went over with an attitude of whatever Abraham asks us to do, we will do it. And we just want to be a part of whatever he's doing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was really good. And with Odamenche, we had that opportunity to interact with the students and do a Bible story and some singing as well with all the classes on the day. So it was really interactive trip and really great to see God's work in what Abe's doing in Cambodia for the kids over there in both OM and Andong.
Yeah.
So tell me about how many people came to the Christmas services and what that was like.
The first service that we had in Andong was actually a little bit smaller than the OM service, but there was still, I don't know, it was a couple of hundred kids there, and they all had lunch.
I feel like there was like 500
500,
kids.
yeah, wow.
Yeah.
My memory's gone.
They just packed them all into such a small space.
Yeah.
This is pre-COVID days, obviously.
Pre-COVID, no
Everyone had
social
their
distancing.
Square 20 centimetres.
Yeah, and it was amazing. They put on a play and did a bit of preaching and music as well. And then the Odamenche Christmas was very much a Christmas spectacular.
It was huge. There was about 1,000 people that came along.
Wow.
And the whole community gets involved. There's lots of bright colours, lots of marquees, and yeah, there was a lot of dancing, a lot of celebration, a lot of food, and again we were asked to speak and to sing, and yeah, I think with these Christmas parties, it becomes a very evangelical event, and not like there's an altar call at the end of the celebrations, but hearing it from Abraham, there's a lot of questions that get asked afterwards. There are a lot of people who come to Christ as a result of these gatherings, and yeah, Abraham has like no fear in just sharing the gospel how it is, and yeah, everyone is very receptive and keen to hear.
Yeah, they definitely were, and they were keen to talk to us as well. So yeah, you'd be sort of standing around and talking to a few people, and then there's a group of them all just hanging on your word. Even though the English Khmer language barrier was there, it was still just to see their faces, and they're just wanting to hear and learn. It was a great opportunity to teach them about God. Yeah, it was amazing, like full on amazing.
Are there any particular individuals whose stories you heard or who you met there who really sort of have stuck with you?
One for me was in OM, and it was actually one of the teacher's husband, and she was a Christian, and he was very standoffish, very wasn't against her being a Christian and acknowledging Jesus, but he was very non-committal, and it was really quite a privilege to be there, and during our interactions, etc., in OM with the school, he was there listening, and he went up to Abe at the end and sort of said, I just feel over this time that there's been this draw, and he wanted to give his life to Christ. So for us to be there was just an amazing experience and a privilege to sort of see God working in that way. So for me, that was a really big thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't have like a story per se, but one of the most impacting things, I felt, was on the last day that we were there. We shared communion with the students and the youth that lived at the church in Odemenche, and there were about 50 students, and yeah, Keith and I were asked to pray for all of them. And what they do is they put out their hands like this, and you go around and you put your hands on their hands and you say a little prayer and you move around the circle. And it felt a bit funny to do that, but it was really, it was just a really special time, and a time where we both got to share about the gospel and share communion with them. And yeah, it was just that real. It was just really well received, really appreciated, and yeah.
I think, as Andy said, we went there with no expectations almost. It was God's got a plan, and we're going to do what Abe needs us to do. So to be put in that position of a prayer circle, it's not a cultural thing that we would do. So it was out of our comfort zone totally. But it was again just an amazing experience to be involved in it, I guess. Yeah, it was really cool.
For both of you, this has been your second trip, I believe.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Keith's first one being we reckon about 12 years ago.
It's a while ago.
And Andy's about 3, 4?
5 years ago.
Yeah, whatever it was.
Yeah.
So for both of you, you've had a significant time investment, significant financial investment, in paying for yourselves to go over there, and no doubt in supporting the ministry when you're not there. Why? Why are you so invested in this ministry?
I guess why I'm so passionate about it is I really believe in Abraham and what he's doing over there. He has such a vision to see Cambodia saved for Christ, and his testimony is one where like he really did come from nothing, and yet God has really kind of empowered him, opened doors, and he's someone who's met the need of the communities in two very impoverished places in Andong and Odomenche. He is not just gone out with the gospel, but gone out with the gospel and action, and created 2 schools and has given kids who would not have got an education, which is which is very important in Cambodia. He's planted a lot of churches. There's just a real fruitfulness to his ministry. And yeah, for someone like myself who knew nothing about Cambodia when I went over that first time with you, Chris, I was just astounded with just how fast things had been moving. And when you see him in action, you just want to be a part of what he's doing. And yeah, that's why we went a second time.
And what about you, Keith?
Look, I mean, I went over with the very first trip, so we knew of Abe at that stage. He didn't have OM, so he had the Andong sort of village church, which was very, very basic and thatched sort of, shade area and very simple accommodation for him and Sopin, his wife, at the back of a shanty town, Andong village. But to see his enthusiasm and in how Christ can transform lives, and as Andy said, with the whole, he had not a lot to begin with to invest all his love in Jesus and trusting in Jesus and seeing the fruit from that. It was just, it was hard to keep up with him. He just the go that he had. And then from that, he's got the respect of the community and from others around, which has just made the spreading of the gospel across different areas. So he's got the schools, but which is teaching the kids the vital education to get employment. But he has the opportunity to spread the gospel there. But he's also got a cattle sort of farm that he's trying to get off the ground to help sustain a lot of the wages, etc., because it costs a lot of money to get these teachers to do this amazing work. So yeah, he's been fortunate enough to be able to then talk to different people that aren't part of that school community but are part of a different community altogether in Odomenche. So just the power of Jesus working through Abe, then through others. Why wouldn't you want to be involved? Mm-hmm. It's been great.
I'm struck in my own reflections. At the moment, our church is going through the book of Romans, and in Romans chapter 1, Paul says that he's not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God that brings salvation to all who believe. And I think one of my reflections when I go to Cambodia, and I've been a couple of times, is that you actually see that the gospel is powerful to bring salvation to those who believe. You actually see the truth of Scripture made alive in ways you don't always see here in the West. And I find that incredibly faith-building, so that when I'm in a place like Lindisfarne, kicking around trying to do my thing and maybe doubting the power of the gospel, I remember that actually, freaking heck, it's real powerful. Yeah, like it's doing some big stuff over there. So that's one of my,
It's very humbling.
Absolutely.
Very humbling to see what these communities, I won't say kids, because the kids have nothing, but except really Abe and then the love of Jesus, to what they have the opportunity to have, and the joy and the smiles and the laughter, all of that which they may never got because of Abe, they now have. So yeah, it's very humbling to realise how lucky we are here in the Western world, in sunny, cold Hobart, to what the guys over in Andong and OM have.
Absolutely. Now, we are in Lindisfarne, and I believe there's now, thanks to you, Keith, or something, there's a bit of a Lindisfarne connection now floating around in Cambodia between the local soccer clubs.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so my boys, actually, and Mabel, my youngest daughter, played for Lindisfarne Soccer Club, the junior soccer team, and they got some new strips. So because they got the new strips, the old strips were just not going to be used anymore. I was on the committee and I put my 2 cents in and said what Andy and I were doing just gone, heading to Cambodia, and they love soccer. Soccer is their #1 sport. So can we take some of the strips? So thank you to the Lindisfarne Soccer Club. They obviously donated, I can't remember, 30?
About 30, yeah.
30 full strips, shorts and shirts. And, you know, they were big enough that even Andy, I could definitely not fit one, but Andy could fit into to one of the tops. And, you know, we handed them out, and it was really quite surreal to be in Andong, Phnom Penh, Cambodia, and seeing the two-tone blue of Lindisfarne Soccer Club running around and kicking a soccer ball and, you know, nearly dying because of heat exhaustion and what have you. But yeah, it was really cool. So so there's a little bit of Lindisfarne now over there in Cambodia with these kids running around playing soccer.
Excellent. Okay, guys, thanks for your time today. It's been great. One more question before you go. For those watching at home, why should they get involved, either prayerfully or financially, in supporting the work of Abraham and the development for the people of Cambodia?
I think you should get involved because Abraham and DPC are bringing hope to the hopeless. They're bringing the gospel message to a country that's ripe for hearing it. And I think in terms of money, from what Keith and I have seen, a little goes a long way. Like $20 over here might buy you lunch, but $20 over there, like you can buy a guitar, you can buy, you know, exercise books, you can buy Bibles. It's it's pretty incredible to see. And I think for us, like you put your money to things that you like. You might have hobbies that you put your money towards. I'd say make your hobby seeing Cambodia be saved for Jesus, and give some money to that.
Yeah, and I think prayer is a thing that's accessible to all of us. So it doesn't matter where you are, you can be praying for Cambodia, and praying for Abe specifically, or as you go on this journey with Abe, you'll get to know people, and you might then be able to pray for the individual that you get to know. And as Andy said, the finance side of things, it might be difficult with the current situation and the amount of available funds, etc. But $5 buys you a really good coffee from a really good barista. But you would be able to sort of put $20 aside a week, and that will go a ridiculously amount of long way over there. Giving to the GDG fund, and it's secure and it's used wisely. It's just an invaluable opportunity to sort of see Jesus in the lives of the guys and girls in Cambodia. It's really, really important, and it's been a privilege to travel over there twice now for myself and for these guys. It makes these mission trips, even though they're a short-term one, an amazing experience from a personal point of view as well. You really get to learn a lot about yourself when you're over there, visiting these sort of communities, and takes you out of your comfort zone a lot. So definitely jump on board.
And just to add to what these guys have said, I can very vividly remember on my first ever trip to Cambodia. I was in the Andong village slum in Phnom Penh, and we were walking through, having just been to the school, and I vividly remember walking down this street thinking, this is one of the most disgusting places in the world I've ever been, and looking into this house, if that's what you call it, but that's where people live, so it qualifies, and there was a kid on a piece of wood reading a book because he knew that education was his road out of poverty. And it has stuck with me ever since that Abraham is providing this free education to these people in the most deepest of darkest of circumstances and giving them not just spiritual hope, but actual physical hope of being able to get out of the slum and to provide for their families. And they knew the value of what they were being given because they were even in the middle, when everything around them said survive, they were setting aside time to learn because they knew that that would give them a better future. And that's the kind of values that Abraham instills in his students, and he's got over 1,000 of them, and that's the kind of investment that you're going to make in the lives of young people if you invest today.
Wasn't it great to hear from Rob, from Abraham himself, and from Keith and Andy? And I hope that you have captured the passion. I'll be honest with you, when I first met Abraham on one of his visits to Australia, I wasn't that moved. But through circumstance, I ended up finding myself in Cambodia managing the partnership for my former church. There, God changed my heart and my life as I saw firsthand the impact that the dollars that our church had raised was having on the lives of people. Children being raised out of poverty, schools providing free education for those who have been left behind by their own society. A society being transformed by the power of the gospel. Lives being changed as they encounter Jesus Christ. Abraham works by providing education for poor students. That is a lot of his work, and that work can be supported tax deductibly through the Global Development Group, and the details for that are in the description or the comments below. Please pray for Abraham, give generously, and support the work of bringing hope to the hopeless. God bless.